was learning to dance and move with particular steps they were supposed to find. All of a sudden someone jumped up and said, I'm gonna dance outside of the lines this time. Going outside the lines, I'm gonna go outside of the lines this time. Going outside the lines, I'm gonna color outside of the lines this time.
The readings this morning, the first one is John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of the people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. And the Word becomes flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory. The glory is of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth.
Our second reading is taken from a novel by Helen Waddell about Peter Abelard, described by one source as the keenest thinker and boldest theologian of the 12th century, but probably best known for his love for a woman called Heloise. In this scene, Abelard is walking in the woods with a friend when they hear a terrible scream. From somewhere near them in the woods, a cry had risen, a thin cry of such intolerable anguish that Abelard turned dizzy on his feet. It's a child's voice, he said. No, said Tybalt, a rabbit. It'll be in a trap. I heard they were putting them out. Christ! The scream came yet again. The two plunged down the bank. Down by the river, said Tybalt. I saw them playing there. Abelard went on, hardly listening. Oh, God, he was muttering. Let it die quickly. But the cry came yet again, on the right this time. He plunged through a thicket of hornbeam. Watch out, said Tybalt, thrusting past him. The trap might take the hand off you. The rabbit stopped shrieking when they stopped or stooped over it, either from exhaustion or in some last extremity of fear. Tybalt held the teeth of the trap apart, and Abelard gathered up the little creature in his hands. It lay for a moment, breathing quickly. Then, in some blind recognition of the kindness that had met it at the last, the small head thrust and nestled against his arm, and it died. It was that last confiding thrust that broke Abelard's heart. He looked down at the little draggled body, his mouth shaking. Tybalt, he said, do you think there's a God at all? Excuse me. Whatever has come to me, I earned it. But what did this little one do? Tybalt nodded. I know, he said. Only, I think God is in it too. Abelard looked up sharply. In it? Do you mean that it makes him suffer the way it does us? Again, Tybalt nodded. Then why doesn't he stop it? I don't know, said Tybalt. All this, and he stroked the little limp body, is because of us. But all the time, God suffers more than we do. Abelard looked at him, perplexed. Tybalt, when did you think of all this? Tybalt's face stiffened. It was that night, he said, his voice strangled. The things we did to poor Hebert. Tybalt stopped. I could not sleep for nights, and then I saw that God suffered too. Tybalt, do you mean Calvary? Tybalt shook his head. That was only a piece of it, the piece that we saw in time. Like that. He pointed to a fallen tree beside them, sawn through the middle. That dark ring there, it goes up and down the whole length of the tree, but you only see it where it is cut across. Well, that is what Christ's life was like, the bit of God that we saw. And we think God is like that because Christ was like that, kind and forgiving sins and healing people. We think God is like that forever because it happened once with Christ, but not the pain, not the agony at the last. We think that stopped. Abelard looked at him, the blunt nose and the wide mouth, the honest, troubled eyes. Then, Tybalt, he said slowly, you think that all this, and he looked down at the little quiet body in his arms, all the pain of the world was Christ's cross? God's cross, said Tybalt, and it goes on. The Patri Passion heresy, muttered Abelard mechanically. But oh, God, if it were true. Tybalt, it must be. At least there is something at the back of it that is true. And if we could find it, it would bring the whole world back. I couldn't ever rightly explain it, said Tybalt, but you could if you would think it out. He reached out his hand and stroked the long ears. Old love ears, he said. Maybe this is why he died. Come, and have your supper, Master Peter. We'll bury him somewhere near the oratory, in holy ground.
Jeff sent me an email and said, prelude, offertory, and special music. And special music, he said, it's all about you. Dangerous. So I wish to have a word of explanation about what I'm playing next. And all of you movie lovers will appreciate this. I've written 5 silent film scores, kind of random, but I'm playing 3 excerpts from those. And these are all from the team that Peter Pan was filming in the early 20s. But a church with 2 movie groups and an outdoor movie coming up has got to appreciate some movie music. So here's some excerpts.
When we speak of God, many of us would talk about music. Some of us might tell stories about climbing mountains. Others talk about feeling the power of the ocean, or being dazzled by sunlight shining through autumn leaves, or overwhelmed by a night under a starry sky. There is something else, something greater than we are, awesome in the true sense of the word. Sometimes we just feel it. Others of us might tell about a time when we were in terrible pain, emotional or physical or spiritual, and felt love draw close alongside us. The higher power who is there for an alcoholic. The comfort that comes for someone who is grieving. Or the joy, like the athlete in Chariots of Fire. When I run, I can feel his pleasure. Today, I've brought you a heresy about God. It's not a famous one, lots of gold stars to anybody who's ever heard of Sabellianism or Patripassionism. But of all the controversies we've talked about over this last month, this may be the most important. This is the one that could save your life. Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor and winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, wrote a book called Night, which maybe you or your children read in school. He tells the story of an incident in Buchenwald. One day the electric power failed, and the Gestapo, summoned to inspect the damage, concluded that it must have been sabotage. So they investigated and found their suspect and sent him to Auschwitz. But the man had an assistant, a boy. The Gestapo arrested the boy. They tried to get him to reveal the names of other collaborators, and when he refused, they sentenced him to death by hanging. If you've read Wiesel's account, you will never forget it. The boy was too small, too light for the height of the gallows. It took him half an hour to die. Listen to it in Wiesel's words. "Where is merciful God? Where is he?" someone behind me was asking. And from within me I heard a voice answer, "Where is he? This is where, hanging here from this gallows." In other words, there is no God. God is dead, never existed in the first place. It was all a hoax. You take evil so horrible and suffering so unbearable, and it overtakes all those intuitions faith is built on, the starry skies and the beautiful sunlight and the power of the ocean. Faith died for many people in the 20th century, from the trenches of the First World War to the concentration camps of the Second. Crime and exploitation, terrorism, all the rest. Faith is nothing but wishful thinking. Religion likes to say that there's a larger plan, a bigger picture, whereby all the terrible things we see actually do fit into the will of a merciful God. This is what Islam says. Believe that if you can, and God bless you. I can't. Christian faith offers a different possibility. A very good man died nailed to a cross. And those who loved him said, God was there. Never in the history of the human race has God been closer than in and through that moment of dying agony. How could that be? You know what? We can't explain it. But once you sense it, as the character says in the piece that Donna read for us, it changes the whole world. That's not where God belongs. And that's the core of the argument that we remember today. Sabellius, for whom the heresy was named, was a teacher in Rome, some 200 years after the time of Jesus, 100 years before Constantine. We know nothing about him except for that one idea he propounded. God died on the cross. God went into the tomb. God rose again. There's only one God, Sabellius said. You can't go dividing God up into the bit that was in Jesus and the bit that watched from some safe distance out there. Either God was in Christ or not. It caused a big to-do. This is heresy. God doesn't suffer. Everybody knows that. Godness means divinity, means otherness. God is above all the messiness we human beings experience. God is serene in majestic untouchability. God is all-powerful, all-knowing, all this, all that, beyond our understanding. We know nothing about the argument, except that Sibelius lost. As we've noted for several weeks now, history is written by the winners. They trounced Sibelius, who dared to see God so close, and got back to fine-tuning their doctrines. Trinity, God there, God here, such that God's hands only got a little bit dirty for a little while. No prizes for guessing that I've got quite a bit of sympathy for the heretic this time. I'm fascinated that they thought they made such quick work of Sibelius, excommunicated him and denounced his teachings and done with it. But what he said wouldn't die. I'm fascinated that so many people latched onto his way of seeing God that they actually had different names for it. Sabellianism in the East and Patripassianism in the West. Great big names for one little idea. I'm fascinated at the way they thought they purged his heresy out of Christian thought altogether, but actually just drove it underground, because it keeps coming back. I love that reading that Donna shared. I don't know if the novelist is right about Peter Abelard. I looked him up on Wikipedia, as you do, and there was no mention of his being a Patripassionist. But many of us here know what it's like to hold a dying animal in our arms and feel the pain of God rip through us. Do you know what I mean? That there's a pain bigger there than our own loss and love. If you've experienced that ever, don't let anybody trivialize it. Of all your life, that may be your most powerful experience of God's love for us creatures. Next to the delight we feel as we watch them play, or as we welcome their cuddles. I have no problem believing that the best and brightest theologian of the 12th century would feel those things and look again at the cross and see God there, so whole, so close, that there's no option but to say, there is my God, there. And I'm fascinated because respectable theology now bends in Sibelius' direction. Dale and I had a professor in seminary who was a close friend of Elie Wiesel's. That's when I first read Night. Bob Brown charged us that we should never say anything about God that could not be said standing in the ruins of Auschwitz. I could not stand there and say that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-merciful, and loving. God allowed that child to die that awful death on the gallows because God gave us free will? You believe that if you want. I can't. I want to say to Elie Wiesel, you were right if you didn't know it. When you said that God was there hanging on the gallows, you were exactly right. That's where God was. Because love doesn't turn away. It doesn't watch from a safe distance. It doesn't hide in otherness. It's closer to us than breathing, nearer than our own hands and feet, no matter what happens to us. It breathes life and hope into our darkness. It breathes strength into our troubles. It breathes forgiveness into our humanity. And it pulls us, prods us, pesters us, nags us into being love ourselves. We are safe in that love forever. Not because terrible things will never happen, but because when they do, we are not alone. Love is bigger. Love outlasts everything else. And it changes the world, not all at once, slowly, person by person, moment by moment, decision by decision, step by step. It will win by sheer power of determination. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You hear that, say the civilians? The Word was God, and everything was made through him, the Creator God and Christ, right there doing the same thing together. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John's Gospel testifies amazingly to a truth too big to explain, too big to comprehend, that the God of all the universe was there in the man Jesus. His death was the moment the glory became almost too dazzling to bear. How is that? Is John crazy? No, if God is there, then God is everywhere, truly everywhere, deeper than our deepest anguish, steadier than our most wrenching fear, dancing in our joy, loving through our love. Near the end of World War II, a small scrap of paper was smuggled out of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Nazi prison cell. He'd been imprisoned for his participation in a plot to assassinate the Führer, Adolf Hitler, an imprisonment that led to his execution weeks before the end of the war. Bonhoeffer had scratched these words on the small scrap of paper: "Only the suffering God can help." Sitting in a deplorable prison cell, facing his own execution, seeing his beloved country torn apart by war, and his dear church following the headship of the Führer rather than of God. That was what Bonhoeffer realized. Only a suffering God can help. Sit with the words and let them speak to you. We don't know how it could be so, but let that be for now. For a long time, the church rejected it as heresy, but sometimes the heart, the instinct, knows what the brain has to catch up with, starting with those first Christians who saw God in Jesus and would never recant. Sometimes it is those who color outside the theological lines who show us the true shape of things. Amen. Your offerings for the work of love in this place will now be received.